quickly review what it is that we've learned up until this point, and then I'll put the actual Sicha up on the screen, and then we can get down to the last segment, which is really this incredible shift of understanding and perspective. It's like really something. So where did we begin? We began with a quotation from the Rambam. The Rambam in the laws of Chanuka goes off on what appears to be a tangent. So he tells us about the laws of Chanuka, and then he addresses what happens if a person is in a situation that they can't afford both their Chanuka candles and their Shabbos candles. What should they do? And so the Rambam tells us that the Shabbos candles take precedence, and that's a key word. He doesn't say that they are more important. He says they take precedence in this particular scenario. And that was something important for us to appreciate, because people often have the impression that when you've got a toss-up between two things and you choose the one over the other, so people often understand from that it means that the one is more important than the other. We wanted to make absolutely clear that the Rambam does not say that. It's not that Shabbos candles are more important than Chanukah candles. It's just that in the particular circumstances, they take precedence. Why do they take precedence? So we say because the purpose of Shabbos candles, according to the Rambam, is that they are to bring peace to the world. Shalom bayis, which is the concept of peace in your own family, peace in your own home, and then by extension, peace in the whole world. And that raised a series of questions for us right there. Why is the Rambam talking about this in the laws of Hanukkah? Surely the most logical place to talk about it should be in the laws of Shabbos. Because we're talking about how great Shabbos is. Well, then surely the best place to talk about how great Shabbos is would be in the laws of Shabbos. So why in the laws of Hanukkah? That's a question in its own right. Then we had we have a whole bunch of questions. Then we had a question, why is it that the Rambam has to tell us over here that it's because Shabbos candles bring peace, where surely the primary reason why you like Shabbos candles is, as the Rambam himself has taught us, is in order to show honor to Shabbos and in order to enjoy the experience of Shabbos. So why here is it suddenly an issue of Shalom Bayis that you don't bump into furniture? So those were the questions, a variety of questions that we asked right at the beginning. And then the Rambam goes off and says, because we see that Shalom, peace, is a very important principle, so important that even when it comes to Hashem's own name, in the case of a Sota woman, somebody who's suspected by her husband of infidelity, that we erase Hashem's name in order to preserve peace. That tells you how important peace is. Okay, why? Why do you have to bring that example? Just tell me peace is important, and I think anybody with a thinking mind would be able to appreciate it. And then he doesn't stop then. He says, Gadol HaShalom, that peace is great, and in fact the whole purpose of why Torah was given out all in the whole world, the entire reason to have Torah is in order to facilitate peace in the world. Like, okay, why is that relevant here? I mean, it's a beautiful concept and it's really important, whatever, but why is it relevant specifically in this particular conversation? So those were the main questions that we had to explore. And effectively, I want to obviously rehash the entire Sicha again, but effectively what we came to learn is this. We came to learn that when we talk about Chanukah candles, because the whole of Torah is given in order to facilitate peace in the world, then that means that every single Jewish practice and every single mitzvah is there in order to facilitate peace in the world, including Chanukah. So when it comes to the holiday of Chanukah, what is our motivation? What is like our deepest motivation in order to have Chanukah? Is to bring peace to the world, because that's what the whole of Torah is. That's what the whole of Judaism is all about, is to bring peace to the world. This obviously included. So when we talk about the idea of bringing peace to the world, and we say that that's what's that's what the whole of Torah is all about, and that therefore is what Chanukah is about as well, suddenly you realize that we're not displacing Chanukah. We're not saying, okay, Shabbos is actually more important, so let's get rid of Chanukah under these circumstances. We're actually saying this is the correct way to celebrate Chanukah under these circumstances, is to put aside your Chanukah candles and just have Shabbos candles, because that will express peace, which is, after all, the theme of Chanukah. And that was quite an incredible insight for us, because that shifts our thinking completely. We're not sacrificing Chanukah in order to facilitate peace. We're celebrating Chanukah in the most appropriate fashion in these circumstances by allowing the Shabbos candles to take precedence. And then we said, still, there are a few things that we need to understand. And in order to understand those things, we split the whole of Judaism into two categories. We said there are those mitzvahs which are proactive mitzvahs, positive mitzvahs. Their objective is to generate more light into the world, more godliness into the world. And then there are those mitzvahs which are the negative mitzvahs, and their primary issue is to remove negative from the world, to remove toxic energy out of the world. So if you have a look at Shabbos, Shabbos is primarily for the purpose of bringing holiness into the world, bringing menucha. the capacity to rest into the world. So the world is a chaotic, stressful, anxious place. And when you bring Shabbos into the world, it settles the world. And how do you create that settlement, that settled feeling, that menucha, that calm? How? By generating awareness of Hashem in the world. So that's the primary goal of Shabbos, is to create awareness of Hashem. Shabbos la Hashem, it's a day that is dedicated to Hashem, more davening, more focus on spiritual things, more awareness of Hashem. That's the purpose of Shabbos. And practically, how do you keep Shabbos? With a whole lot of restrictive laws. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing. But don't be fooled. Don't think just because there's so many things you may not do on Shabbos, Shabbos is a negative mitzvah. It's not. It's a positive mitzvah, the goal of which is to generate goodness, holiness, light into the world. The practical way of keeping Shabbos is that you have to avoid certain things. Therefore, when it comes to Shabbos candles, which represent the theme of Shabbos, which is to generate light and positivity into the world. So what's the primary reason that you have Shabbos candles? In order to generate light and positivity into the world. So the kavod Shabbos, the honor of Shabbos, and the oineg, the pleasure of Shabbos, that's really what Shabbos candles are all about. There happens to be a spin-off, right? There happens to be a spin-off of if you do something positive, it also gets rid of something negative. So if you light candles, the fact of the matter is now you can see, and therefore practically you don't bump into furniture. So that's a nice to have. That happens as an indirect result of the Shabbos candles. But the primary reason that we have Shabbos candles is to generate something positive. The primary reason we have Shabbos is to generate something positive into this world. Now, Chanuka, on the other hand, the primary reason that we have Chanuka is to chase out negative from this world. That's what the Chanuka story is all about. A group of people who brought a very negative energy to the Jewish world. They wanted to stamp out Judaism. They wanted to remove our connection to our heritage and to our God. And our response to that is that we say, we're not standing for this. We're going to fight it back. And that's the primary issue of Chanuka, is this concept of fighting and ridding the world of negativity. So happens that the way in which it's expressed is by lighting candles. So there's a positive element to it as well. But the primary element is to get rid of the negative out of this world. Now, that is called shalom. This is the interesting thing. That's called shalom, peace. Yes, of course, Shabbos candles are about generating peace into the world in a proactive, positive, light, encouraging kind of a way. The truth of the matter is that the ultimate experience of peace is where you have conflict and you resolve the conflict. That's usually where we apply the term peace. So that there is conflict in the world, and then we settle the conflict. We overcome the differences, or we arrive at an agreement, or whatever it is that we need to do in order to bring peace into the world. So by the same token, that's exactly what happens over here with Chanuka. What's Chanuka? We get rid of the adversary. We get rid of the negativity, and that's why the world is a more peaceful place, which we can now display with Chanuka candles. By the way, that's exactly the same as the Sota. There was conflict. This was a family in crisis, and they thought that their marriage was on the ropes. Now that we have done something proactively negative, right, taking Hashem's name, which you proactively write, for something that appears to be negative, to erase it, but actually what have we done? We've settled the issue, and we've created peace in the world, or peace in their world as this couple. And that's really why Chanuka is not just also a conveyor of the theme of peace, but the primary theme of Chanuka is peace. So now when I've got the choice between, do I light my Chanuka candles or do I light my Shabbos candles? And Shabbos candles are there for the purpose of peace. And Chanuka is also there for the purpose of peace. So Chanuka steps aside to say, let's light those Shabbos candles because they will illustrate peace in a very open, kind of clear way. And that is the main thing that Chanuka is all about. So effectively, at this point, we've come to the conclusion that there's no contradiction over here. There's no fight. There's no conflict between Shabbos and Chanuka. Who's going to get the upper hand under difficult circumstances? They both carry the same thing. They both have the same intention. They both want to achieve the same thing in the world, namely to bring the world to a state of peace, to a state of awareness, to a state of goodness. And under these particular circumstances, Chanuka allows the, so to speak, the revelation of peace, let's put it that way, to come through Shabbos. Now, where we got up to last week was absolutely fascinating. The Rebbe said he's going to take it to a deeper level, and that deeper level is something which is completely mind-boggling. And that's where we're going to continue today. So we just started that section last week, and we introduced a very important and life-changing principle, which is that the Yesh HaNivra is connected to and one with the Yesh HaAmiti. Very important terminology and not so simple to wrap our heads around. So let's take a look at where we are. I'm going to actually go, if you don't mind, I'm going to start from the top of the page again, just to contextualize. Das ist der primistische Pirush in dem, was Torah nitne lasst shalom ba'olam. We now have a deeper, more spiritual understanding of what it means that the Torah was given in order to produce peace in the world, meaning, as the emes metzius from Welt ist Torah elikus. It's such a radical concept, and it's so life-altering that it's really important to go back and to rehash it again, as we're doing now. When people hear of the term peace, usually in most cases, we think of peace as a settlement, an agreement, a ceasefire, putting aside differences, a compromise. Here we're seeing something completely different. Here we're seeing that the idea of peace, the idea of peace is to reveal a different dimension of reality. Now, this is very much what Judaism is all about. Judaism is all about taking the world that is a place of diversity, and not only diversity, but a place of conflict, and to bring it to oneness. So here's an example. We say in davening, Shabbos Mincha, we say that we call the Jewish people Goy Echad Ba'aretz. Now, the direct translation of that is one nation on earth, as in we're a unique people. But Chassidus explains it a little differently. Goy, we're a nation, Echad Ba'aretz, whose job it is to reveal the oneness of Hashem within the earth. Now, the wording is very important of it. Ba'aretz, within the earth. There's a very strong feeling that there's a world of darkness and a responsibility to bring light into the darkness. And that's what we do as Jews, to become the light unto the nations, to influence the world, to change the world. Actually, the goal is to expose the world. The Hebrew for world is olam, which comes from the word helem, which means that something is hidden. What's hidden? What's hidden is the real depth of the world, the real theme of the world, the real makeup of the world. And it's our job to unveil that. So when we say that the Torah came to create peace in the world, it does not mean the peace of let us find a peaceful, happy medium between the spiritual aspirations of Judaism and the physical needs of the world. Let's rather find peace saying, but you realize you are at a space in a state of peace. You are in a healthy place. You are connected. Very similar to the principle of teshuvah. What's teshuvah? Not to say you were in a bad place and now we've got to work on you in order to get you to a good place. Rather, teshuvah is to say you are fundamentally in a good place. You veered off that path for a period of time. Now let's take you back to who you really are. That's the kind of shalom that the Torah wants to create. It's shalom that resonates with the core of your being. So you don't feel at all uncomfortable in this result. On the contrary, you actually feel the deepest you've ever felt, the most solid you've ever felt. Think about it. Here's an example that we can all relate to. So let's say you're a teacher in a classroom, you have a kid who doesn't behave well. Happens, right? Happens quite frequently in the classroom. So there are various approaches. One approach could be harsh discipline. This is my class, these are my rules, this is how we're going to do things, you're going to conform, and that's how I'm going to have peace in my classroom. Well, effectively, you, the teacher, are going to be in a peaceful place, and the student, well, the student is just going to conform. That does not mean that the student is happy. That does not mean that the student is healthy. That does not mean that the student is good for the long term. The student conforms in your classroom. Then there's an alternative, totally different teaching approach. Let's make this all fun. Let's make this all exciting. The world's a wonderful place. You know, come into my class. The rules are quite flexy, but it's okay because we're learning, and that's the most outcomes-based education and whatever the case might be. So there too, the class might be in a really happy place, but the teacher isn't, because it's quite uncomfortable at the end of the day. As much as you might have a very kind disposition, it's difficult to run a class where there aren't really strong rules. So what's the goal? What's the real goal? What's the real success? Where do you see a brilliant teacher? Is the teacher who is able to find within that troubled student where their strength is, where their goodness is, where their power is, and then to bring that to the surface. Because that doesn't mean I'm now dancing this very difficult walking on eggshells experience of trying to keep everybody safe and everybody conforming. I've brought the richness of this person's spirit to the fore. They now think of themselves in a completely different way, and they now respect themselves, and therefore they feel good about themselves, and therefore we're all good. Recently, somebody sent me a clip of a guy, I have no idea what his name is, But this guy, as a kid, he used to constantly drum on the table and drive all the other students and the teachers nuts. And eventually he had a teacher who called him to stay after class. And of course, he dreaded that he was going to get the speech again or whatever. And the teacher said to him, "Have you ever taken drumming lessons?" He says, "Because clearly you're a drummer." And it had never entered his mind or his family's mind or anybody else's mind. And he went off and he became one of the top, I don't know his name, but he became one of the top drummers in the whole world. So, and he attributes it to this particular guy. And years later, he went and he reunited with that teacher and made a whole video about it, and whatever the case is. That's shalom. Shalom is not, it's not a pretense. Shalom is not a fabrication. Shalom is not a fantasy. Shalom is where you find the real good within somebody and you allow it to flow to the surface. So now they're at peace with themselves. Naturally, they'll be at peace with their environment. That's what the Torah comes to do. The Torah doesn't come to dictate to the world. Okay, everybody has to conform to a particular way of living. The Torah doesn't come to say, okay, you know, we're this loving entity and everybody has their opinion and everybody's entitled to behave as they wish and whatever makes them happy as long as they don't hurt anybody along the way. No, Torah doesn't at all accept that kind of an attitude. Torah says, let's find your peace. Let's find your truth. Let's find, and not your truth in the classic liberal way that the world likes to peddle today, which is your truth is whatever works for you. None of that nonsense. Let's find your truth with a capital T. Let's find the emes, the truth of why you exist. And the fact that at your core you are connected to God. There's elikus, there's godliness within every single thing. That's the piece that the Torah wants to illustrate to the world. That's why we have a Torah. Not to be frummer than thou, and not to create a nation state of the Jewish people that controls the whole world. As the Rambam says, clearly we don't want Mashiach to come so we can control everybody else, but rather that there can be an awareness of Hashem at every level, not awareness in the head, awareness that I feel through every fiber of my being, and therefore I feel so solid and so good and so connected and so meaningful and so valuable that obviously I'm at peace. So halfway through the first paragraph on the page, Nidno der Farvos Elikus is called Sibas Hisabuse Vikiyumo Vidal Terebis Mevoy Bariches. So our objective and goal is not just simply that the world should recognize that it's only thanks to Hashem that it exists, because Hashem, as the Alter Rebbe explains in great detail in Tanya, recreates the world from scratch at every nanosecond, but rather, and here was this completely revolutionary concept that we came across last week. Noval the etzem metzius von yesh hanivra is the yesh ha'amiti, but rather the recognition and the realization that the essence of me is one with the essence of God. So, just a quick recap. I know we spoke about it last week, but let's just rehash it because it's a very big concept. So we have these two realities called yesh. The definition of yesh means consciousness of self, consciousness that I exist. Yesh, I am. I am. So Yesh HaNivra is the created reality that is very conscious of its own existence and therefore its own needs. And then you have Yesh HaAmiti, which is the true existence, Hashem. Hashem doesn't exist because he believes he exists. Hashem exists because he exists. So we believe because we exist because we believe that we exist. Or as they say, I think, therefore I am, right? So we don't have empirical proof necessarily of our existence. We don't know that we're not some hologram in some greater entity's imagination, right? We exist because we believe that we exist. And therefore, if somebody, for example, starts to believe that we don't exist, or if society, for example, believed that we didn't exist, we actually would cease to exist, at least to every level except for the physical being of who we are, which is fascinating. So where do we get this from? Where do we get this from that we are so yesh, that we are so real, especially when you consider from a mystical perspective that we're not real. We're being propped up by Hashem at every single nanosecond of existence because he's just currently kind of making us be. So where do we get this consciousness? Where do we get this ego from? Where do we get this self-assuredness from? This is the point. That's the clue, that the yesh anivra is plugged into the yesh ha'amiti. That us, the existence, the created reality, is actually one. Our core is one with the real reality, and we subconsciously know that. That's why we think we are real. It's a fascinating concept. So we believe that we exist. Why? Because if you really want to be honest, and you really want to go to the core of it, and you really want to talk in the most, so to speak, unmaterialistic, spiritual sense, we are one with Hashem, and Hashem really exists. That's why we believe that we exist. So let's read further. We said that the purpose of Torah is to bring shalom ba'olam, to bring peace within the olam. So what is olam? We'll translate the word olam as world, but let's see. Olam milashon helem, the word world, is directly etymologically related to the word helem, which means concealment. Now, in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, in the holy tongue, as to distinguish maybe from modern Hebrew, so for example, when modern Hebrew uses certain words that are just the English words that have been Hebraicized, so then it's quite valuable for us to know that it doesn't have the same power as Lashon HaKodesh. But the biblical Hebrew, the divine Hebrew, every single word is very carefully chosen, and every word has an entire encyclopedic meaning to it. So the word olam is not chosen by accident to mean world. It is specific because it's related to the word helem, which means concealment. So what is the definition of world in Lashon HaKodesh? It doesn't mean an environment. It doesn't mean a planet. It doesn't even mean a universe. And olam means a reality where truth is distorted, where truth is concealed to some extent. That's the definition of an olam. But now listen to what he says. The nature of the world as we know it, in its undeveloped form, in its rawest state, the design of the world is to conceal Hashem from view. That's how the world is designed. In fact, the design of the world is that it should specifically appear to be independent, to run on its own independent system, and to be so convincingly independent that we have entire fields of study to work out how the world operates, as if these things happen on their own. So we have the field of science, physics, biology, astronomy, nanotechnology, whatever it might be. And each of these fields believes absolutely that these systems happen within the environment of this world, and there's nothing beyond this world that controls them. That's the kind of standpoint of our analysis of the world. We see the world as a metzias far sich, as the expression goes over here, as an independent entity that is self-propelled. That's how we see it. So nature is a force. We talk about nature. People talk about it. Climate change is a result of the impact that humans have had on nature. Earthquakes are a natural phenomenon. They happen randomly when seismic activity hits a particular tipping point, and then there's an earthquake. Disease is just the mutation of cells within the human or within the world around us that influences the human being, and it's just naturally occurring phenomena. And that's how we see the world. The world is a metzias, it's true. It exists independently. That's the definition of helem. The shade is over our eyes. We don't see things as they are, we see things as they appear. So therefore, so the way that the world is such a convincing reality that you don't look at the world and see godliness. It's not how we think. You drive down the road and see, oh, that pothole is a manifestation of godly energy. That billboard is speaking words of holiness. It's not how we perceive the world at all. Our experience of the world is that it seems to be distinct from godliness or void of godliness. That's our personal experience. And not only that. Nor as it darf nicht ankommen, chas schon zu dvar Hashem lachyois or lekaima, as Welt ist chas v'sholem abgerissen von Elikus. Our perspective of the world, not only do we not see godliness seeping through the pores of the world, but our perspective of the world is that the world is quite healthily independent. It doesn't need God. And if you don't believe that, the fastest growing religious movement in the United States today is atheism. You don't need a God. We're good. Look at us. We've created these mega structures of politics and of economies and of social interaction. Look at us. What have we done? Our world is fantastic. Just as long as no meteorite accidentally bumps into us, we'll be good. As long as we cut down our fossil fuels, we'll be good. There's no sense. There's no consciousness of the fact that we are absolutely dependent on Hashem's good graces for every breath that we take. It's not natural to the world. That's called olam milashon helam, Bira zoi beloim manik, to use the expression that is used by Avraham Avinu. The Medrash tells us that at the time of Abraham, when he got up to teach the world about God, the prevailing thought was, this is a city without a leader. In other words, Isha Yashar ben of Yaseh, do as you please, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's the only value. That's the natural state of the world. In fact, so much so that we're told the world as we know it is designed to last for 6,000 years. And the first 2,000 years are called the years of Tohu, which means confusion and chaos. And the reason for that is because there wasn't yet a mechanism available to the public to allow us to see beneath the veil. So the nature of people, and you couldn't blame them for it, was that they felt that the world was this independent structure where you could make choices without any responsibility to any kind of higher authority, as long as you were happy, like the people of the generation of the flood, or like the people of the generation of the Tower of Babel, all the other polytheists, the pagans who lived at that time. And then in the Jewish year 2448 began a new system, a new process called the 2000 years of Torah, the awakening, the insight, the manual that allows you to see the world in a different light, to see the wood for the trees, not just to read the screensaver, but to actually appreciate what's going on beneath the surface and to appreciate what the world truly is, not what it looks like. That's the moment where that troublemaking kid in the class is suddenly shown, hey, you're not fundamentally a troublemaker, just you haven't yet recognized your greatness. So let's teach you your greatness. And suddenly you'll be a whole different person who won't only not disrupt, but you'll actually become a success story. And that was the moment of the giving of the Torah. So yes, the Torah was given to the Jewish people, but the objective of the Torah is not just for Jews to be observant and for Jews to be able to fulfill mitzvahs and for Jews to be able to come from. The objective of the Torah is La'aseh Shalom Ba'olam, to bring out the peaceful essence of every part of the world. Und zu liebdem is given Sinas HaTorah. For that purpose, the Torah was presented La'aseh Shalom Ba'olam, to bring peace into the world, which means Machen Shalom zwischen dem Olam mit Kvayochel dem Oibishten, to be able to make peace between the world in its consciousness and Hashem in his reality. Es soll sein Nicker v'nirgash nicht nur als die Metzius von Welt des Nicker menaged und stirch has Hashem tzedekos. Und Yesodem is darf ständig ankommen zum Eibishten. And that peace is not just simply a matter of convincing the world that you're not contradictory to Hashem, or even convincing the world that you are completely reliant on Hashem. Nor as kol Metzius von Olam Gufa is Yesha Amiti Kenal. The purpose of Torah is to show the world that you are connected at your core to Hashem. Now, if we could succeed in doing this, if we could teach the world that way of thinking, naturally there'd be no conflict, and naturally there'd be no jealousy, and naturally there'd be no war, and all the things that we describe will happen when Mashiach comes. Well, now you can understand it. It's the natural outgrowth of this kind of consciousness and awareness, which the Torah is there to achieve. Consciousness that says, I don't have to conform to what Hashem wants. I don't have to pay my dues to the landlord, because otherwise he might turn off the breathing apparatus of the world, but rather this peaceful, happy, meaningful, uplifting sense of I am connected to Hashem. Why did I miss this for all of these generations? Why was I so involved in trying to make a name for myself and make money, and was jealous of that one and concerned about this one and backstabbing the next one and criticizing this one? Why did I waste all the energy when actually, in essence, firstly, I'm connected to Hashem, and therefore we're all connected? That's the awareness that Torah comes to give. Und if he says moving, now let's take it back to something we spoke about before, where we said you could split the whole of Judaism into two streams, two channels. The one stream being the proactive, positive parts of Judaism, the things that you have to do to generate divine light in the world, and the other being the track of avoidance, the things you're not allowed to do in order to expunge the negative from the world. Now we can understand something very profound about these two streams, namely, so you have Chiyuv Toisvus Am Shachas Oir und Shlila Hasoras HaMenaged. So we have got basically two techniques. One technique of Judaism is do more mitzvahs, because every mitzvah that you do will radiate a little bit more godliness into this world, which will help to create this consciousness of the shalom, the peace for which the world was created. And the other branch of Judaism is avoid things that you're not allowed to do in order to get rid of things that obscure and obstruct that awareness that everything is connected to Hashem. Now that's exactly, go back to this kid in the class. There are two things you have to do with this child. The child is a troublemaker. The child is the bane of every teacher until the one wise teacher walks into the room and says, let's find your greatness. Now, in order to find your greatness, we also have to teach this child to unlearn certain negative self-perspectives. Because this child has heard for who knows how long, you are disruptive, you are a problem child, you have discipline issues, you don't listen, you'll never amount to anything, all that stuff. You've got to get it out of the way. So this teacher has a double job. On the one hand, there is the positive encouragement. You have greatness. Look at this talent. Let's develop it. Let's make it into something. Let's turn you into a success story. And at the same time, we'll consistently have to feel the, but I can't, but I'm a failure, but nobody likes me. So there will always be two channels of fixing any major issue that needs to be resolved, particularly when you're trying to put something back in touch with its core self. Part of the job is expose the core self. Part of the job is get rid of the inappropriate negative attitudes that blocked that self. So that's the world. The world is the problem student in our story. The world keeps throwing its toys out of the cot and keeps saying, let's do this, let's do that, let's create a society that's all about capitalism, let's create a society that's all about whatever it is, hedonism. Let's create a society that's all about materialism, whatever the particular thing happens to be. So we're going to sit the world down and say, listen, we understand that you're tantruming because you'd like to get a little bit of attention, because you're worried what's going to happen. If perhaps we don't satisfy the needs that you perceive that you have, maybe you'll never be happy. So let's teach you something about yourself that goes a lot deeper. You do not need to satisfy yourself with hedonism, with capitalism, with extremism, whatever particular ism catches your fancy. You can satisfy yourself with yourself, with your being. You are good. You are holy. This world is Hashem's garden, as it says in Shir Hashirim. Basi legani. Hashem says, I came to my garden. And we know this because right at the beginning, Hashem put Adam and Eve into a garden. It's a beautiful place at its core. Yes, it's overgrown with weeds. So we've got to get rid of those weeds. We've got to plant some flowers to show what fertile earth it is. And we have to get rid of the weeds. We've got to generate holiness in this world by doing more mitzvahs. And we've got to sweep out all that negativity in the world that blocks the arteries of spirituality. And the way we do that is we say, no, that kind of thing we're not going to do anymore. That kind of thing we're not going to say anymore. This kind of thing we're not going to think anymore. But whichever channel we happen to be working on at any given time, you will agree that the goal and motivation remains the same. Doesn't matter if right now I'm painting the house or pulling out the old plumbing. It doesn't make a difference. It's one intention: to renovate and improve the house. Doesn't matter if right now I'm adding fertilizer to the grass, which is not a pleasant experience, or if right now I'm watering my roses. It doesn't make a difference. It's all part of the same process, making a beautiful garden. It doesn't matter if right now I'm sitting this kid down and saying, don't believe what people tell you that you can't do. Look what you have done. It doesn't matter. It's part of building that child up. So it doesn't matter if right now I'm doing a positive mitzvah or refraining from something that the Torah forbids. It doesn't matter. Either way, I'm achieving the same purpose, namely to create shalom in our world. So the goal and motivation of the entire Torah, both channels within Torah, whether it be the channel of positive mitzvahs or the channel of negative mitzvahs, the goal remains the same, a singular goal. We're bringing peace to this world. How? By megala sein as the emes mitzvahs from Welt is Lekutei. How do we bring peace to the world? By peeling away the outer layers of what makes this world look like such a horrible place, to reveal the truth. Hashem's world. It's Hashem's reality. It's an extension of Hashem's energy. The world is not distant. The world is not disconnected. The world is part and parcel of Hashem. You just got to open the wrappers. Was das kommt durch mevatel sein de nit emes von Welt. Was Welt ist meine mefelikus. Wird me meilen is gale demes und metzius von Welt elikus. And this is the key thing that we have to keep reminding ourselves consistently. The goal is If you can remove those layers of falsehood of the world, then you don't have to renovate the world, because the good stuff lies inside. What does that mean? So let's say, for argument's sake, you follow the news, which is never a good idea, because all it will do is depress you, right? So you follow the news and you start thinking, my goodness, there are so many things that have to be fixed in this world that is never going to come right. As you repair one part of the world, so the next thing goes wrong. As we improve healthcare, so we land up with a pandemic. As we put this person in government, that country puts somebody else in government. There's so many problems. The economic issues, social issues, political issues, geographical issues. It just, the list goes on. As long as we believe that every one of those things is real and every one of those things has power, the world's problems are insurmountable. And it's not the Jewish approach. The Jewish approach is we don't go plugging holes. The Jewish approach is we get rid of the stuff that makes those holes appear in the first place. So our goal is peel away layers and illustrate how the world is godly. This is what we're supposed to be doing as Jewish people every single day. So everybody else could sit there with all of their political insight, and everybody else could sit there complaining about how this one is incompetent and that one is incapable, and we've got these. They can, but that's not our job. Our job as Jewish people is we have Torah. And the more we learn Torah, the more we come to appreciate that all of these things can change like this in a flash. Things resolve themselves as soon as you expose the good within. So rather than to sit down and argue for hours on end about whether your views on life are correct or my views on life are correct, and which side of the argument do you stand on? Are you a conservative? Are you a liberal? Do you believe this? Do you believe that? We waste far too much energy and time on the conflict of life, where the whole purpose of Torah is to find that which unites us. And the cliche says that there is more that unites us than what divides us. And if you're not convinced of that, just look at the world over this last year and see how we had no option but to unite to deal with a pandemic that was bigger than all of our conflicts. So this is the goal of Judaism. The goal of Judaism, and something we have to think about in every sphere of our lives, is how do I find the godliness in this? How do I find within whatever's happening in my world or in my mind that I don't just read the world at face value, and I don't just read the problems, but I see the opportunity for good, for Torah, for awareness of Hashem, for connection. Und das ist verbunden mit Klalos Teichen Hilches Chanuka. That theme is very much the theme of Chanuka. Der Nitzachin von ihnen und der Bittel am Matze von Gozug Zeres al Yisol Batlu Dasam Le Nichoisam Lasek B'Torah Mitzvahs. What happened in the Chanuka story, as we very well know, there was this massive, powerful entity called the Yevonim, and we use that word because people get confused and they start thinking Greeks, and then they say, but they didn't come from Greece, they came from Syria. So let's talk Yevonim, because that's the attitude, that's the philosophy that they pursued. And they wanted one thing only, and that was to stamp out Judaism. They were quite okay with Jews, and the truth of the matter is they were even happy with Jewish culture. They just wanted to get rid of this annoyance called Judaism, or as we call it, Torah, the acceptance of an absolute authority, the fact that Hashem is real. That's what they wanted to eradicate. You know, for them, gods were things you put in big fancy temples, and they accommodated certain aspects of society. So you needed a god of plenty, of produce. You needed a god of love because people had to marry, and you needed a god of weather. And it's not practical in order to run a society. But don't come with this business that there's a singular god and that defines the purpose and the reality of all things. That's what they wanted to eradicate. And how do you do that? You get rid of Torah mitzvahs, because Torah is there in order to bring that reality to the world. How did we get rid of them? So let's be honest. A group of yeshiva students against one of the most well-trained armies in the world doesn't sound like a great prospect. So the fact that those people, the Hashmonai family and their little group of allies, the fact that they stood up to the Yevonim is what we call Mesirus Nefesh, a willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of truth, for the sake of Hashem, for the sake of shalom, of peace. And it's very weird for people to imagine that you fight in order to create peace, but sometimes that's exactly what you need in order to create peace. Was die Indien am Mesirus Nefesh nimmt sich von Yechidische benefesh. Und das ist die Darge von welcher es kommt, damit es in den Shalom. As nitor milchatchil ken ort far menaged with the Rebbe is mavor baruch. So where did they get the strength from? Where did they get the guts from? Stand up. I mean, we understand that Judaism was under threat, and we understand that they felt they had to do something. But where did they get that kind of tenacity, that kind of commitment to be able to take on the most powerful army in the region? So we call that Mesirus Nefesh. Mesirus Nefesh, the capacity to sacrifice. Notice, it doesn't say Mesirus Haguf or Mesirus Chaim, which would mean that the willingness to sacrifice the physical or the willingness to sacrifice life. Mesirus Nefesh, the willingness to completely hand over one's soul to Hashem. Whatever Hashem wants from me, that's what I'm going to do. I don't have any considerations. I don't have any planned outcome. I don't know how this is all going to look on the other end. But the bottom line is I'm going to throw myself in with every bit of what I've got in order to do what Hashem wants. So we're taught that capacity for Mesirus Nefesh, that capacity for sacrifice, which, by the way, is something we have seen repeatedly throughout our history. Jewish people willing to sacrifice themselves for Hashem under the most bizarre and trying circumstances. So how do we do it? How do we get this power? It comes from a dimension called the Yechidische Benefesh. We're taught that the Jewish soul has 5 layers to it. We're typically only in touch with 3 of those layers: Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, which is basically the part of our soul that allows us to behave in line with what Torah needs or wants. The part of our Neshama that allows us to speak in a holy manner, and the part of our neshama that allows us to think and process in a way that is aligned with Torah. That's the part of our neshama those are the 3 parts of our neshama that we are typically in touch with. Beyond that, there's a level that is called chaya. Chaya is the part of us that is very subconscious or superconscious. It's the part of ourselves that we're not necessarily in control of. We don't necessarily know when it's going to hit. But that's the part of our soul that suddenly inspires us out of the blue. You know, you're sitting around minding your own business, and the next thing you feel, okay, I need to do something Jewish right now. You know, like I need to learn, I need to connect, you don't know where it came from. So that's like the higher dimension of the soul that sends us these wake-up calls from time to time. And when it's not doing that, it makes us feel guilty when we do things that we shouldn't do, because it knows what's right, and it knows that we're not aligned with what's right. And so it gives us this niggly guilt in the back of our mind. And that's actually why Jews always behave to a certain extent, even when they're not completely engaged with their Judaism, because of this higher layer of the soul called chaya. Now, any part of that, of the neshama that we've just described, could be challenged. So my behavior could be challenged. You know, sometimes I could do something that I'm not supposed to do. My speaking could be challenged. Sometimes I say things I'm not supposed to say. My thoughts could be challenged. I think what I shouldn't think. I can even be challenged to the point that I no longer feel guilty, or I no longer feel inspired, where I could become completely apathetic and I couldn't care less, and my Judaism is really just going through the motions and perhaps no motions at all. And then there's a part of the neshama that is called Yechida. Yechida means to be united. So that's the part of my neshama where myself intersects with Hashem. That's the part where I'm rooted in the source. When we spoke earlier about the Yesh HaNivra, the created reality, being one with the Yesh HaMiti, the true reality, that's my Yechida. I am part of Hashem. That's immutable. There's no force or power in the world that can uproot it. Nothing can damage it. Nothing can stop it. If I activate that part of my soul, it pushes with such a force that it breaks every single barrier. Why? Because that's the part of my neshama that doesn't come with force of strength. It comes with force of truth. And when you see truth, everything else dissolves. This is the part of my neshama that says the truth is there's only Hashem. The truth is my neshama is only connected to godliness, and everything else I've done in my whole life is actually distraction. And therefore that part of my neshama looks at the world and says, if there is opposition to Hashem, if there's opposition to Torah, it's distraction. Because the truth is there's only Hashem. Ein oid milvado. There's nothing else besides Hashem. Maybe it's as Arab gekommen euch befehl kipshute as Gavli soll al oiveim va'avodnum mechazem malchus the Yisrael the shalom b'shalva ba'idin kipshute. And you see a fascinating thing. You would expect that in order to create peace in the world, you need to have like strength, and you need to have negotiators, and you need to have elaborate plans. And what brought peace to the region at that time? Very simply, dedication. Dedication to the Yechidah Shebenefesh. Dedication to the principle of Shalom, that I'm not going to be distracted by these people, and I'm not going to be sucked into their way of thinking or the conflict that they want to create. I'm going to focus on one simple thing. The world is Shalom. The world is here to express godliness. And if you think otherwise, you're the problem, and we've got to shift you out of the way so we can get back to what we have to do, which is express godliness in the world. And guess what? They succeeded in bringing peace to their nation, not by fighting. I mean, they had to fight practically in order to get rid of the Greeks, but the goal wasn't fighting. The goal wasn't protracted. The goal was reveal Hashem. We know why we're here. We know what the truth is, and you're in the way, so you got to go. Not because I have an issue with you, not because I have a chip on my shoulder, but because Shalom, the revelation of godliness in the world, is the single most important thing. Now, the Rebbe ends the Sicha, which we can do relatively quickly, with a call to action. Von kol anal ist verstandig, als bechol hashana kula darf sein a große Stadlis in the mitzvah von Adlokas Ner Shabbos Kodesh. The Rebbe says, call to action. From this Sicha that we have learned, from this insight that we have seen about the power of the Shabbos candles, and specifically how it plays out on Chanuka, we can appreciate that if all year round, we should put in tremendous effort to encourage women to light Shabbos candles. As jede jüdische Tochter euch vater chasne gleich mishigier lechinuch zalons in den neshek kin dume kaben pomim barucha, that every single Jewish girl, even long before she's married, from the age of chinuch, which is 3 years old, should light Shabbos candles. Is mechanike nogea beyoyses man soll ausnutzen die mechanike bemjuchot mit dem meglichste stadles nicht nur mifze neres Chanukah euch zu verstarken mifze neshek. So then that teaches us that in the Shabbos of Chanukah, this year there's 2 Shabbos of Chanuka. So the sorry, it's not. The second is just as Chanuka ends. So there's as you come to the Shabbos of Chanuka, besides the fact that obviously we have a responsibility to get out there and to encourage people to have Chanuka candles, we should be encouraging people to light Shabbos candles. Was das darf geben euch hat es in der Stadt, wie es was man nimmt mit von die Chanuka in die Tag, was kommen nach Chanuka. And then from Chanuka, that should empower us in the days that follow Chanuka. As when we gather together from across the world, all the little flames of all the Shabbos candles and all the Chanukah candles, it will collectively make a massive bonfire. That fire will illuminate the whole world with the light of Mashiach, who will expel the darkness of the Golus that we're in. And we'll see true peace in the world in a real sense, as the Rambam says, that at that time there will be no famine, there will be no war, there will be no jealousy, there will be no competition. Because then Mashiach will bring the whole world to a single language, with a single orientation, with a single sense of peace to serve Hashem. And then we'll be able to see, as the Medrash tells us, that the merit of us lighting Shabbos candles is that we get to see the lighting of the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash, which, please God, we should be able to see even before Chanukah this year. I think everybody will agree that it's an incredibly powerful Sicha with a very mind-expanding concept to wrap our heads around. But the take-home clearly is we should not see the world as opposition to godliness. We should see the world as opportunity to reveal godliness. And it will change everything about how we live.
Thank you.
Any questions?